everybody. Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me as always are my fabulous co-hosts.
Hey, Rob, it's Diana.
And it's Jackie. Hi there.
Hello! And here we are in our exciting episode number 63.
No, I think it's 66.
66. I'm off. 60. I'm losing track with the summer months. 66. Here we are with episode 66, and we also have a very special fourth co-host, Dr. Joshua Jessel. Hi, Josh. How you doing?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me.
We're very excited to have you here. Today, we are going to be talking about latency FAs. So this is kind of a sequel to our trial-based FAs from way, way back.
Episode 7?
Episode 7, yes.
It's a sequel.
And it's a sequel, yes. That's how you describe your research as a sequel, right, Josh? Because he published an excellent article about latency FAs, also combined with the Iske. We asked Josh to come on the show, and he was kind enough to do so.
How kind of you to let me come.
Oh, so we're going to be talking about two articles tonight. One is Response Latency as an Index of Response Strength During Functional Analyses of Problem Behavior by Thomason-Sassi, Iwata, Neidert, and Roscoe from the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis in 2011. And then we'll be mostly listening to Josh talk about treatment of elopement following a latency-based interview-informed synthesized contingency analysis by Jessel, Ingvarsson, and Whipple from Behavioral Interventions 2018.
There's actually more authors.
Oh, there's more authors. I got the wrong page. I'm like, and Metras and Kirk and Solsbery. Sorry. I hate when they print those little cheat sheet pages. It drives me nuts. And I'm looking at the wrong one. So anyway, sorry about that. Josh, before we get into this exciting topic, please tell the audience about yourself.
Sure. I earned my master's degree at University of Maryland, Baltimore County, where I also worked at the Kenny Krieger Institute. And we did a lot of, assessment and treatment of problem behavior there. They have the neurobehavior inpatient unit where they got pretty severe cases. So that's kind of where I got my start with the assessment and treatment of problem behavior. Then I went to Western New England University where I got my PhD working with Greg Hanley, and that's where you'll notice I get the interview-informed synthesized contingency analysis, part of my life in there. I worked in Texas for a little bit. I did a postdoc where I ran a clinic and worked with lots of clients, basically molding this model and creating it to be more practical and more efficient. Mm-hmm. And that's really kind of geared my research towards creating a model that people can use. That's me.
That's awesome.
Excellent.
Josh, what do you like to do for fun?
Oh, I'm also at Queen's College right now. I should probably say that, right?
Oh, yeah.
He's just wandering the world. Being
For fun, that's always a tough question. There's always fun in New York, right? You take a train and you go somewhere. Just surprise yourself around a little bit.
Right.
There's no train where I live. I just go outside and it's just stars and nothingness.
But also, Jackie, did you know that if you do what you love, then you never have to work a day in your life?
That's great advice. Josh, have you seen Hamilton? I don't know why. My kids were listening to it earlier, and I suddenly was wondering. I guess that's still playing, right?
Amazing. Tickets are probably like $700 or something.
It's crazy town.
So you've seen it 3 times?
Book of Mormon was funny.
Oh, yeah. Was it good? I think there was a traveling show of it coming around. Mm-hmm. I don't remember if it was in Massachusetts or not, but I always pretend I'm going to buy theater tickets, and then I never do.
Just put them all in your cart.
Yeah, someday I'll go see these, but not today.
Not today, because today we're talking about
latency FAs.
Latency FAs.
And FAs that have latency as a component of them. Josh, before we get into the older article, the response latency is an index of response strength, can you talk a little bit about how you got interested in the idea of incorporating the latency FA? What research there is, research into your own work?
Sure. Well, first of all, the article, I love that you're going to go over it. It's one of my favorite articles, and I think it's so intuitive, the transition between the first study and the second study. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to give away any spoilers. No, you'll talk about that later on. But all of these sort of FA studies I do, I'm trying to just make it quicker. So how can I make it quicker for the individuals? How can I make it quicker? So the Iske itself takes about 20 to 30 minutes to conduct, and sometimes that can be too long for some individuals or practitioners who just really don't have the time.
Mm-hmm.
There are other methods, and the latency is a great one because you only have to see one response. So in the same time that it just takes one response to end a session, and also if it's severe enough, you can really reduce any possibility of injury during that time, right? Just one response will provide the reinforcers, and we can move on to the next session. So you'll see a couple of my studies come out where I'm either doing one session where it's called a single session Iske, or this one is the latency-based Iske, and just in general trying to make things quicker.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. And sometimes you can't have behaviors occur repeatedly, right? So, I mean, latency-based FAs are important for that because if you have severe problem behavior or severe SIB, you wouldn't necessarily want that to be happening over and over again to figure out the function.
Mm.
Sure. Yeah, the basic sort of idea is we need to know enough to create an effective treatment and no more. So make sure we stop at that part of and no more, because we can always get more analytically precise, but that puts our clients in danger, or even ourselves or other therapists. So find out what you need to be effective.
Yeah,
that's it.
absolutely.
That's a great point, Josh. And I think it's one that, especially if you're a new, we have a lot of new BCBAs who just passed their test and are going to go to their new jobs. They're going to be like, I got to run my first FA. And I think sometimes it's hard to remember you are doing this for the purpose of creating a treatment. You're not doing it because you need to be so very thorough in some sort of like publishable work you're doing. Because
it's assessment.
Yeah, it's an assessment. Like you have to go until you have the answer to the question you have, and then you need to move on. I think sometimes people get nervous. They're like, but maybe I don't know it for sure. Maybe I should double check it. And they get very, very nervous. I mean, I know sometimes even I'll get that way with like a really complicated case. I'll be like, do I have enough information to make a good treatment? Or am I just getting nervous? Has this been going too long? Or do you have too many outside pressures saying, are you done with this assessment yet?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true.
Yeah, exactly.
But you don't want to delay treatment.
Yeah. Another reason why I love the latency-based FA is that sometimes the behavior doesn't occur repeatedly, right? Like, if I take all my clothes off, then somebody will have to redress me to then test the condition again.
Right. You've made a change to the environment that you cannot easily repeat.
Right. Or if I, like,
Review.
break the table in half with a karate chop. I always imagine that's what I would do
like
if
a
I
Miss
had a
Piggy
problem
move?
behavior. Yeah, like, Wah! And it would be, like, popped. You can't necessarily, like, roll in another table, like, real fast.
You can continue to break the halves of the table into further halves.
That's true.
Yeah.
But that might not be the fun.
That's true. It's got to be a big mahogany table.
Right.
when you're-
It's going to depend on how you operationally defined.
only so
table
much budget
breaking.
for so many tables.
Right. Yeah. But the other example in there was vomiting.
Oh, yeah, vomiting, you
Don't-
can't do more than once.
Yeah.
It's those situations where resetting the environment makes it unnatural.
Mm-hmm.
And you want your functional analysis to be a natural representation of the context in which the problem behavior is occurring.
Yeah. Absolutely.
All right. Well, let's get into the first study, the Thomason-Sassi. I'm saying that right, aren't I?
You are. She just goes by Sassy now.
But just
Because
by
why would
Sassy.
you not?
Sassy.
I know, that's the best
Sassy.
last name.
Do you guys remember Phil Hartman? There's
I don't
Yes,
know
of
who
course.
that is.
Yeah, you don't know who Phil Hartman
Oh,
is?
Jackie.
Remember? I only watch Hallmark movies.
no.
No, but Josh,
Phil
do you know who
Hartman.
Phil Hartman is?
Thanks,
The
Josh.
singer.
Thanks.
No.
No. Oh, he was a comedian for forever. I mean, two decades. He was on The Simpsons a ton. Do you know The Simpsons? Did you ever watch Simpsons?
I know who
We
he is
got this,
now.
but I still don't know. I'm going to Google
He's
him.
Troy McClure.
I did. I
Hi.
just Googled him, and that's how I knew who he was.
Yeah.
You may remember him from such films as Today We Kill, Tomorrow We Die, and Gladys, the Groovy Mule. Oh.
Did you have something to say about
Yes,
Phil Hartman?
I vaguely remember a Saturday Night Live sketch because all I ever watched were old Saturday Night Lives or on Comedy Central, where the whole sketch was him just talking about Sassy Magazine, and he'd just go, "That's sassy." So I'm glad I took 10 minutes to talk about that.
Okay.
The latency to punchline was 3 minutes.
Bump.
So let's get into the.
I am excited to talk about latency FAs. And you know why?
Did you know you start every episode
You do.
with "I'm excited"? to talk."
But let me tell you why.
I'm starting to wonder if you're really excited.
I'm so excited, Rob. I can't even finish my sentence. I'm so excited. I'm excited because it's new stuff, right?
Yes.
We talk about the FAs. We've been talking about FAs since 1982/1994. Now,
Stop for a while and start again.
everything that we know about latency FAs has all happened within the last decade. Right? This was 2011, and now it's only 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And already so much has changed, even from this article, for example, the article that Josh is going to go over.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that is a great representation of how our field is continuing to evolve and grow. And it's like something exciting and new. And it's also, I think, great because a lot of folks out there may not have run a latency FA before or know exactly what it entails. So I'm excited that we get to discuss it. And I am actually excited. So there.
So the other episodes, you weren't really excited.
No,
if you go back
only
and listen,
this one. Okay, if I tell the honest truth, just this one.
I mean, I think that's true. And Josh really hit the nail on the head. The name of the game is we need to do this thoroughly but faster. I mean, I saw an article like about a year ago where there was like a teacher who got like a giant grant to determine how to find the reason that children were misbehaving in her classroom. I'm like, but you don't need a grant for that necessarily. That's known science. But I think the fact that a lot of times if you're like, oh, here's the behavior analyst, we're going to go in this room, we're going to set up these conditions. A lot of people say, no, I don't want to do that. Give me something else. And if you don't have something else, you're persona non grata. And our field really needs to really shape it up in terms of we can do a lot of different things. It's not just we're the autism treatment people if we want to really make headway.
I want a shirt that says that, though. We're the autism treatment people.
No, you don't.
I don't really, actually.
No,
it just sounded like a shirt. It just sounded like a shirt phrase.
We're the autism treatment people.
Or like a commercial. Like it just runs along the bottom in a banner.
Hi, I'm Troy McClure.
Yeah.
Okay, so because no one had done a latency FA before, the Thomason-Sassi article takes us through all the steps needed in order to get to the end result of actually running a latency FA, but even lead up to asking the questions of why do we need to ask this question, and is it okay to ask this question? And then finally, can we apply that question specifically to the latency FA?
And it's a dreaded 3 experiments
it is,
in
but
one
like I said, we're going to
article.
run through them like lickety-split so that we can give Josh time to talk about his cool stuff.
Before we talk about the study, we should talk about what a latency FA is, I think.
Okay.
Since we haven't yet. We've just been...
All right.
Sure.
We've been
You
running
wanna take
around
that
the
one?
bush.
Yeah, why don't we let Josh do that?
Josh!
He's the master.
Ooh.
Yeah, so our typical measure of response strength that we use in a functional analysis is going to be rate. So the higher the response rate, or the more differentiation, right, between a control and test condition, the higher the response strength is the general statement. But for latency, it's kind of the opposite, where we're looking at for that quick response. So a brief time means stronger response strength, and we're using that instead of rate to determine the functional relation between problem behavior and that environmental event.
Awesome. So when we look at a typical FA graph, we're looking to see, what's the highest data path, and do we see differentiation between that data path from the data paths for the other conditions? And with a latency FA, it's flipped, which is really funky to look at if you're not used to it. So because on the y-axis we're going to be measuring latency, and the lowest data path on our graph is going to represent the shortest latency, which we're going to prove, hopefully, indicates response strength.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I ran one once, and I had the hardest time reading my own graph. I was like, these seem to be the lowest, so they're the least likely.
Wait, no.
Let me look at my y-axis for a second. Ooh.
That's funny. I love the Thomason-Sassi article, and I love the questions that they're asking in experiment 1 and 2. Yeah.
Exactly. So you already talked about, Jackie, some of the reasons why you might not want to use rate. So if you have a really high intensity, dangerous behavior that could be dangerous to either the client or the experimenter, you may not want to let that run for a whole 10 or 15 minute session. If the environment has changed in some way, such that there's really only one opportunity for the response to occur, like stripping or table smashing, for example.
Or elopement. The more likely elopement, I think.
Yes. Or elopement. Or if it's a physiological response, which can only occur a set number of times,
Sure.
such as vomiting or other things that we could probably bring up, but vomiting, we can just leave it at that. So there's just not as many opportunities for that response to occur. So latency might be a better measure. However, no one had done this before, so they weren't sure. We can't just flat out say, let's just use latency, right? Because we're behavior analysts, so we got to take things a little bit slower than that. So the Thomason-Sassi article walked us through several different questions. The first was, what's really the relation between rate and latency? Do they correspond with one another? Sort of, it's like an inverse correlation kind of. And then is response latency predictive of response strength? And then finally, could we use response latency to determine function of the behavior much as we would with a standard functional analysis?
Right. And remember, when we're talking about latency, we're talking about the time to the onset of responding. So from a discriminative stimulus or from some sort of event to the onset of the response, since we hadn't talked about that.
Fair. So they broke that down, those 3 questions down into 3 experiments. In experiment 1, I'm going to go through these like real fast. They had 4 participants who were adult men with developmental disabilities. They had target behaviors of different vocational tasks that they were looking to teach them. And then they were measuring both the response rate and latency to respond in those conditions. And they had 3 conditions that they were looking at. They had a baseline condition in which no reinforcement was presented for the tasks. In that condition, they were looking to see, did low response rate correspond to a longer latency to respond? And guess what? It did. Then they moved to an acquisition condition in which responding was reinforced with edible reinforcers. So they looked to see, did responding increase when reinforcement was presented, but they were also looking to see, did a high rate of responding also correspond to a shorter latency to respond? And it did. And then, from there, and this one's important, they moved on to a maintenance condition in which, during each session, only one response was allowed to occur. And once that response occurred, the session was terminated. And what they were looking there to see was, these responses had been occurring at a high rate with a short latency to respond. So they were looking to see if only one response is allowed to occur, does that latency remain short? And guess what? It did. So that sets up some really nice framework, right? It was just using I don't know, they were like putting paper clips on things. Really benign behavior, but looking to see, can we use this model to create a parallel for down the road when we're going to apply this to a latency
So
FA.
clever. I wish I would think those things. I don't, but I love that idea. I love the idea that they're like, we want to look at, I bet they thought about problem behavior first, right? Because that's
Sure, yeah.
Dr. Sassi studies, and then they were like, but how can we look at it more carefully? And then I love that they turned it on its back, right? And like, we're going to look at it for skill acquisition. That's the safe thing to do, and then move forward with their questions. What do you think about that, Josh?
My favorite part, can I say that?
Yes.
Of course.
My favorite part was when they did the reanalysis first, and they saw, the first response is brief when it's the same test condition in which you see high rates. But there's a confound with that, right? A reanalysis, they're still getting the experience with the contingencies in the overall session, in the 10-minute, 15-minute session. So they said, well, here's a confound, let's solve it. And just ran the latency-based analysis and saw that the latency then matched up to a completely different functional analysis in which they did rate full session. So I thought that was pretty cool.
I did too, and it almost sounded like you were 90s rapping right there. You're like, look, they found a confound, then they solved it.
Check out my FA.
Check out my latency FA as I find out the variables that maintain it.
Now, do we know, when I was reading this, I noted, I think it was this article, the acceptance to the publication of this one. Was it this one? I was talking about.
I think it was, yeah.
That it seemed like there was
years.
It was a long time.
4 years.
So, do we have any idea? Like, I don't know Dr. Sassi personally, or I don't know if she's ever spoken about this, but with the 3 experiments, I was assuming that they must have done one of these, tried to publish it, and were told you need more information, so they did a second or third one. Is that sometimes how it works?
Oh, there could be any number of reasons.
Okay,
why.
so they might have had all 3 of these all ready to go, and it was just more editing. I don't.
It could have also been, who knows? It could have been the reviewers were late, and then the action editor was late. Maybe they asked for more data. There could be so many things.
It could be a whole combination of those things.
Okay, I just
it
know
could
if
have
anyone
just languished on a desk for a couple years. Sometimes that can
just
happen.
the way that the article was written with that, step A to B to C.
You could be correct. I don't know.
Was it
I
one of
could
those
ask
things
her.
of like, oh, well, the A and B seem like the important things to start with, but it was like, no, you need more. I mean, I was just curious if anyone.
But I feel like the C is, you got to have the C.
Yeah.
Experiment 3.
But I think given that it's a new type of FA, you kind of have a lot of like, yeah, I guess that kind of worked in this example, but do we really know? that latency
Yeah.
is as good as rate? Because it wasn't 100%. It wasn't like every single FA
close,
was
though.
the same. It was very close.
Experiment
Yes.
too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. So that is exactly the question that they needed to ask in experiment 2. They took a big old mound of data, which they already have, right? Which you love. I love when you can go back and
Me
do
too.
those
I never have that, though.
retrospective studies. And they said, okay, well, we have all these FA data. Why don't we go back and reanalyze those data as if we had conducted a latency FA and see, do we see correspondence here? So they found 38 different data sets that met their criteria, which were that they had at least 2 conditions and at least 3 repetitions within those 2 conditions.
A tested control condition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was, I think they said it was 37 participants, so someone had 2 FAs done. And these were looking at a variety of challenging behavior, including self-injury, aggression, property destruction. All of them had sessions that were 10 to 15 minutes long. And like I said, they took the original graph, which was response rate graph, and then they also regraphed those same data up to the first occurrence of behavior within each condition, and they measured that as the latency. And then they gave those graphs to a group of 1 BCBA and 8 of their, most likely, their doctoral students, and said, what's the function of this behavior based on these data?
9 doctoral students.
Oh, my bad.
That's okay.
Can I interrupt the BCBA and the BCBA candidates
Uh-huh.
that had at least 1 year of experience
I
looking
was
at
thinking
FA?
the same thing.
What PhD candidate has only looked at FAs for 1 year? What were they doing with all the rest of their
Right.
time?
Well, they could have been master's to PhD students, like doing it all in one go.
Yeah, but still, I never got a PhD, and I was looking at FA graphs for more than a year before I finished my master's. Maybe I'm just especially great at my
Rob's the
master's.
shit
Yeah, quite gifted.
in the FA looking.
All right, so they were looking to determine correspondence between the 2 different types of graphs, and they determined that by, again, like I said, so this sort of inverse correlation. So if there was a high response rate in one condition, was there a low latency in that condition on the latency graph? Or were both graphs basically undifferentiated? Because they did have some of those types of results included in there as well. So they had everyone do that. Overall, it was high levels of agreement and high levels of correspondence between the 2 graphs. So for 33 of the 38 data sets, they determined the same function of the behavior based on the latency graph as from the other.
They did that in a group, though, when they were analyzing them. Correct?
They were projected onto a screen one at a time to the group of raters who discussed each graph and reached a consensus.
I just was more wondering in terms of when we're looking at agreement of analysis and having so many people, doesn't that defeat the purpose of having so many different individuals analyze the results? Because if you're all taking a consensus, there's going to be a bias implemented into the group discussion, right? Or does it not matter? I mean, again, I'm not, you guys, I know you guys have all published a lot. The only thing I've ever published is this podcast. So I don't really know how any
You have that
reviewers read
walkthrough,
that.
the Indiana Jones walkthrough.
I did have a walkthrough about the, Josh, you ever played an Indiana Jones video game before?
On Super Nintendo?
No, I didn't write one about Super Nintendo. It was on the Xbox. But I won a major award for my walkthrough about the Indiana Jones game. I got $50 gift card for that.
Take it home, Rob.
I remember
awesome.
I remember if you search for me on Google, the only thing you would find is Robert Perry Cruz wrote a walkthrough for Indiana Jones. It's my claim to fame.
He's so dreamy.
Anyway, sorry. Unrelated.
What do you think, Josh, about the getting in the group and talking about the graphs?
Yeah, I think typically what you do is it's anonymous and individual.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Turn it in, your answer, and there's no discussion about it, because I do see Rob's point about people can just come to a consensus for the sake of coming to a consensus. So I actually did a study where we grabbed 6 PhD students and we had them provided separately. And, you know, if they didn't meet consensus, that's just part of it. That means that you didn't find something that people could agree on.
Cool.
I mean,
It's kind of like a way, right? You need an independent agreement for that, or else there's a problem with your measure.
Yeah. I mean, it might be a moot point in that there's been more research on the latency FA. Like even your research, you know, moving on to your research, Josh, there's been other research that have kind of corroborated many of these findings. But for like the first one of its kind, I'm just wondering, you know, just as a minor point, whether that would have made it a stronger article or a stronger speaking to the hypothesis or proof of the hypothesis. It was just a thought.
Yeah, I still think it's a strong article because the reader can do the same thing. They can look at it and they can come to the same conclusions.
Yeah, I agree with you there, but still, it would have been nice.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
One little step.
Yeah, and I like you, like you said, Josh. The way this article reads is very, here is my thought process in coming up with this change in procedure is very, very good. I just was more wondering as kind of someone who's not looking at publishing very much of the work I do. Would something like that matter? But thank you all for talking to me about it.
It's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, thank you. I try.
For the 5 that they did not agree on, 2 of them, according to the standard FA, appear to be multiply maintained, and 3 of them were automatically maintained. So there was a lot of variation in those data that perhaps the latency didn't capture in the same way. So that's kind of where they left that. But the important thing to take away from that is even though they were looking at just the first data point on the latest Latency FA, right? Because there's only one data point per session. The important thing to remember is that these are just, taken from archival data in which those individuals were exposed to the entire 10 or 15 minute condition, FA condition. Mm-hmm. So while they saw, nice differentiation when they were using those data for the Latency FA, what we don't know is would you see that same level of differentiation if the session ended directly following that first response and the individual didn't have then the 10 extra minutes of history of responding in context of that condition. Mm-hmm. So that really brought us over to experiment 3.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so here in experiment 3, they wanted to compare the results of a latency FA with a standard FA to ensure that the behavior came under discriminative control with one exposure and not with those multiple exposures. So they actually ran FAs and latency FAs in this. So this was not archival data. They had 10 participants that were included in the study. 8 out of the 10 of the participants had no experience with the therapist, so it was a novel therapist, which would make sense, right? So that we're making sure that there's no history already embedded with the therapist. And all of them had no experience with FAs within 6 months of the study. And data were collected on problem behaviors, and they used a real-time data stream to ensure that they could see when behaviors were actually occurring.
It makes me think of like the Matrix, like the green data.
Yeah.
Like the
I think they used live data, the Insta data.
Yes, I know.
Yeah, I think they did that. And they always conducted the Latency FA first, and then did the standard FA next to account for the multiple exposures. It makes sense.
Yeah.
Right.
So as not to defeat the purpose of experiment 3.
Right? They'd be like, oh no! When I read that, I'm like, nice thinking, guys. And in order to try to differentiate between the conditions, they literally did everything they possibly could. They had different therapists for each condition, separate areas for each condition, separate t-shirts for each condition. They had different access to materials across each condition. So everything we tried to make it as clear as possible on which condition they were in. Another thing to note was that they used the same order of conditions throughout the latency FA and the standard FA to ensure that they would, I think, maximize those sequence effects, right? So they made sure that the alone condition was following the attention condition. So they just had a lot of it. They had attention, and now they're using that to...
Well, and that's the big concern. You're going to get one shot at each of these so many times.
Gotcha.
We're not 100% sure this is going to work. Let's hedge our bets and make it as discriminable as possible.
Yeah, and that was actually clever because I wouldn't have thought of that, I don't think. I would have been like, oh, I need to counterbalance my conditions because that's what you read all in the FA literature.
I feel like that's changed because I've heard multiple people talking about just do it in the same order every time. And that, to me, felt very new, like that we should do the same order. Because same thing, Jack. I always thought, no, you're supposed to counterbalance these things.
But I guess if you're putting them in an order that's going to promote responding in that condition, based on the motivating operations in the previous condition, that makes sense.
Yep.
So they were thoughtful in it, and they told us why, which I loved.
If you even need to test all those conditions.
Right, if you do. But, yeah, so the Latency FA ran until the problem behavior occurred, so they set whatever discriminative stimuli that they used in experiment 2. So as soon as the problem behavior occurred in the attention and demand condition, the conditions were over. But in the play and the alone condition, or the no-ignore condition, the condition persisted 1 minute following the problem behavior so that they wouldn't inadvertently reinforce the problem behavior in those conditions. But it never lasted longer than 5 minutes in the latency FA condition, the latency FA, and then the standard FA was just 10 minutes. Just a regular standard
It's
FA.
a boring old FA.
Just a boring old FA.
people.
And so what they found, which was pretty awesome, is they have this great table that I loved. Table 1. It's on page 63 if anyone wants to reference it while they're reading along in their chairs.
You're going to chop that thing in half?
Yeah. Is that 9 out of 10 of the participants saw similar results or similar outcomes from the latency FA to the standard FA, where the one that had inconsistencies, the latency FA suggested a dual function, whereas the standard FA represented only one of those functions. So that's like half right.
Yeah.
Right?
It could have been worse. It could
have been way worse. It could have been like, oh,
automatic. It was
yeah.
like, oh, what?
And one nice thing about the graph, about this table as well, shows the amount of responses needed in order to
That's the best
demonstrate control. Whereas there's like so low in the latency FA, like the highest is 29, and that was across all conditions because it was automatically maintained. Whereas in the standard FA condition, the highest was 779, which is so many instances of behavior.
We've all been there.
We've
all had that FA of like, oh, are you done? Are you done? I can't. It's not differentiate. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I think that's really neat. I mean, they did show that you can get similar results with the latency FA to the standard FA, but they did say that you should be cautious, right? Because there was that one. That, you saw a dual function where it may not have been a dual function. But they did say that if you had really salient discriminative stimuli, you had a fixed condition sequence, that you should be able to use the latency FA and not the standard FA.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't necessarily mean the latency-based FA was wrong because it didn't correspond to the standard.
Oh, yeah.
And that's something we are starting to, I hope, move away from, is saying that the standard functional analysis identifies the capital Z reinforcers and everything else doesn't. And they need to be able to compare it to the standard. It should be more than that. It shouldn't be a comparison of these assessments because they're all flawed. They do not identify the reinforcers for problem behavior. It's the treatment that follows that's important. So maybe the based FA, the results of that informed a better treatment, in which case that's the pragmatic answer, right? That's the one we should choose. That's just my 2 cents on that.
No, that's a great
Your
point.
cents are like more than 2,
cents.
right? That was like, I think 75. I'm going to raise you to 75 cents, almost $1.
That was a great point. Yeah.
And I think it's sort of sad at the end of the article. They've done all this work. I think they've made a very elegant case for, latency FA. Think about this as something that you could use in your practice. And then but we don't know. I don't know. Maybe not. Probably use the regular one unless you have to use the latency FA. They really kind of cut themselves off in those last couple sentences in the article.
I bet they had to. I bet that was something
that was the 6 years.
Yeah.
That was the 6 years. They were like, finally, if you just add that one sentence, we're okay with it.
Oh, so much work. And then they kind of I don't know. Don't use this.
All right.
It's sad.
The groundwork has been laid.
All right.
I'm so excited.
But before I'm gonna leave our audience waiting for just a little bit longer though, because
the suspense is killing us.
Before Josh comes in and says, "Okay, this is how we took it to the next level." Let's take a little break for a couple things. First, I want to make sure that if you are listening to this podcast, know that we are ACE approved. Hopefully, by the time you hear this, we also got re-approved. I just sent all that paperwork in. So you can get CEs for listening to this episode, and you will need a few things you can find in the show notes, or you go to the website to go through the process of getting CEs from us. You're going to need 2 code words hidden throughout this episode. And we've had a lot of great guests on the show, but Josh is our first guest to actually ask if he could give us the secret code words. So these are from Dr. Jessel himself, our special secret code words for tonight. And the first is cantaloupe. Diana, spell it because I can't see from this far away.
Cantaloupe. Ish.
Cantaloupe.
Like I'm going to eat a cantaloupe. Or screech, you cantaloupe. Who you calling cantaloupe? Melonhead, which is my favorite Saved by the Bell joke.
I thought you were going to want me to do it with you because I knew you were going to do it.
I'll do it again. Let's do it again. Okay. But screech, you cantaloupe.
Who you calling cantaloupe, you melonhead?
Ah! Cantaloupe.
Josh, don't worry. Sometimes you'll feel like me when you're like, I wish I lived here more. I'm here a lot of the time, and I still don't get all the jokes.
No, I had to explain that one to Diana. We've known each other for a very long time, so she said to hear it a lot. Yeah, it's a personal deep cut. So Josh gave us a great code word, but before we get into his great article, let's take a little break. We'll be right back.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD-level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu. See you there!
All right, and we are back, and I hope you have been waiting with bated breath because Dr. Jessel is going to talk all about his article on how he took latency FAs, kind of smooshed them together with Iske's to make something really exciting. So Josh, take it away. Tell us about how you came up with the idea for this research article.
I noticed kind of in our literature on the treatment of elopement, and it's not specific to elopement, but our treatments are so eclectic. You know, we have you can try a DRA here, you can try a little NCR there. There's no definitive answer for a practitioner or a behavior analyst of solving a specific problem from beginning to end. How do you solve this problem? That's kind of what I wanted to provide, was this modified version of a comprehensive assessment treatment model that we came up with, or Dr. Hanley really came up with early on, and just apply it to elopement. So a practitioner, I'm hoping, when they read these articles, or this one specifically, they say, I see the big picture. I can see, the light at the end of the tunnel. I know where to start, and I know what's going to happen in the end. Mm. Yeah, that's the big picture answer.
Yeah. Was the Iske combined with the Latency FA, was that more to do with the fact that you were at the time working with Dr. Hanley on Iske-related research, or you just felt that was the stronger assessment model to look at for the problem behaviors that you were faced with?
Yeah, this was post-Hanley. Mm-hmm.
That's how we all define our lives.
Yeah, post-Hanley, and we had clients come in, and when I was working in this clinic, we would have every 2 weeks a new client come in, mm-hmm. And it was a general problem behavior unit, but these specific ones were their problem behavior was elopement. So we used that wonderful article you mentioned earlier to help guide our modification to an Iske that uses latency as the response measure and fit it into this entire model of going from that latency-based Iske to a skill-based treatment. Mm.
So the Iske was more for the time, and then the fact you were able to gather information related to the problem behavior that lent itself to using the Iske. Does that sound correct?
It's what I do as a practitioner.
Oh, okay.
When I run analyses, I use the Iske.
So
I'm kind of in the same boat these days. Like if I've got enough information, I would like to use an Iske. Yeah.
We should do a review of the Iske.
Yeah, I guess we've never talked about the Iske on the show.
Yeah, and I think plenty of people know about it now, but we should make sure we talk about it. So.
All right, bring me on next time.
So let's say I'm coming to the clinic for the first time, Josh, and I say, you're going to do an assessment. Well, I hear you doing Iske, but I've heard that there's an article from 1982, and that's how you're supposed to do behavior assessment. What is this Iske you speak of? How would you kind of quickly explain it?
Yeah, if I were to explain it, the general description is it's a practical functional assessment, and the process involves an open-ended interview where we first get that qualitatively rich information from your history and the child's history to then inform our analysis. So we want to create something that's individualized, that's specific for your child, and we're listening to you, right? We're taking what you tell us is the problem, and we're evaluating that so that first we can show you, yes, that you are correct. Most parents need to know that they're right and their voice matters, and we validate that. And then we go on and we provide treatment in that specific context. It provides more socially relevant context for them to treat it also, so we don't send them home with a treatment that involves them having to do something completely different. Really, we want them to go back to their same environment that they're in and reduce as much effort in the treatment as possible so that they can just go back to their natural home and have the problem solved, basically, right?
Great. So in this case, you did the structured interview. Did you modify it at all from the kind of the standard interview that Greg had developed when creating the Iske? Any extra questions that you asked, or was it pretty much the one that you could get off of his website?
Yeah, it's pretty much that one. It's from Hamley 2012 appendix there, but it's also on his website. Yeah, I use the same question. It just flows differently each time, right? You follow the flow of your interviewing and make sure you don't run over them.
Yeah. Would you mind speaking a little bit? You know, like Diana said, this is the first time I think we've talked about an Iske at length on the show. What is your interview style with that? Do you switch up which question you're asking based on what they're talking about? Do you come back around to make sure you hit every question? Is it you've just done enough of them at this point through your work with Greg and your work in the clinic that you just sort of you know what you have to ask? What's your style?
You get better at it, right, as you practice. But you are the analyst, and what your job to do is to get the information out of what they're saying, because the parent knows best. The parent knows the child. They know the problems, but what you need to do is understand that from a behavior analytic perspective. What are the antecedents? What are the consequences? So for me, I let the questions flow, and I don't ask every question necessarily. It's just I get to a point where I'm confident that I can create the test condition. And if you can create the test condition, it's time to move on to the observation and the analysis itself.
All right.
Nice. I feel like the question is, if you had to turn this behavior off right now, what would you do? Has to be very telling.
I think I've modified it a few times with people. If it's someone who's a professional, I'm like, all right, let's say right now I'm the superintendent of schools and I come in and say, I need this kid to stop this right now or you're fired. What would you do? They've gotten very good. Oh, okay, I guess I would do this and this and this. Thank you.
Yeah, it's important to be able to stop it also. We're not looking for out-of-control rates of problem behavior. We're looking for optimal rates. So can you immediately turn it on, and can you immediately turn it off? If you can, then we have a pretty good understanding of what's controlling that problem behavior.
And Josh, quick question that I have. And so when you were thinking about this study, did this initially start off as like a clinical, like 2 clinical people that we were seeing, or was this like an idea for research that you had that then moved, or what did it start from your clinical side of things and then move to research because of the results that you found?
Yeah, the latter. And I love that type of research where you're helping someone first and then you can publish it, right?
Yeah, I love that.
It's not an idea of, hey, how do I do something in terms of research or in terms of answering some sort of obscure question. It's I'm helping this family right now, and I can use that to then help other families later on.
Yeah. Well, kudos to you, Josh, for then having all the information you needed to then say, and now I can publish this. Because I know I've had 1 or 2, ideas in my time with a colleague where we're like, we just did this thing. Well, it was great. Do we have any of this other data? Oh, no, we don't. Oh, okay. This is never getting published. So good job just having it all ready to go and having it be a kind of an afterthought to the treatment itself. You had two different students, participants, and they seemed like they had kind of they presented very differently when they came into the clinic, but they had the same, similar topographies of problem behavior, correct?
Yes.
And you decided to use Latency FA just because of just in terms of looking at what am I going to do with elopement? Do I really want to bring them back into the room every time and confound the hell out of my assessment, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it was, so the interview for the participants, the parents said, well, for one of the clients, Steve, the parents said, we go to malls and he runs away to the fountains, or he runs away from us to go to drinking fountains and likes to play with the water. So this seems like a very specific problem that we need to recreate and then solve. And then for Zane, his was at school, he wouldn't stand in line with the other kids, or he just wouldn't wait appropriately in line. And every time the teacher looked away, he would elope, and if his mom was around, he would run to her, and otherwise he would just run to other preferred people or materials.
Seems
so
like
we're
a
not
problem.
Testing, yeah, we're not testing, well, what about general attention as a class? What about general escape as a class? We're testing specific context to each individual.
That's actually really good to point out, too. So then people, when they're reading this, are not thinking, oh, elopement in general, this is going to work in all situations where a kid might elope. It might, right? But we also would want to look to see if those situations have the same type of functions in place.
And these were just two of the problem behaviors that you were sort of a part of the team addressing, right? There were other reasons that they were at the clinic, it seemed from the article.
Yeah. So they all come for some pretty severe problem behavior, and sometimes we find children like these where they have multiple different topographies and multiple contexts in which the problem behavior occurs.
It's good, because when I first read it, I was like, the kid just won't stand in line, and why is he at this inpatient clinic? This seems really intense for line behavior. But then, as I read it, I was like, oh no, okay, read a little closer. It's a lot of things going on.
And you said it quickly, Rob, but your point was a good one, too, about if you were trying to run a standard FA on elopement, and every time elopement occurred, you then retrieved the child and brought them back, then you've added in a lot of other attention to that. So they, maybe it was just eloping to access the water play, but now you have also potentially added in other variables, too, which you didn't mean to.
Yeah.
So that's what you meant by confounding the hell out of it.
Yes. Yeah. That's usually what I mean when I say confounding the hell out of it. That's a pretty standard statement I make.
Yeah.
So you finished your Iske. You've decided that you have a pretty good sense of what you need to test. And was that when you sort of looked into the literature on the Latency FA to try to overcome that confound? Or were you already kind of thinking that was going to be a component of the assessment? Yeah.
I mean, there was those two articles. Neidert, I think, had one also, and I hope I'm saying that correctly.
Us too.
There are a few on how to run the latency-based functional analysis, and I kind of just took that and applied it to the Iske. And then that's just a small portion of what we did, right? I love how I always talk about the Iske so much, but in terms of the assessment and treatment process, it's the briefest part.
Right.
And yet it's the most that people want to talk about. Yeah, for these ones, it was less than 10 minutes total.
That's amazing, because the Iske itself, when I first heard Dr. Hanley speaking about the Iske, I read some of the initial articles before it was even called the Iske, and just sort of looking at the time savings, this could be 30 minutes, maybe an hour. Wow, that's amazing! And then reading this, I was like, how many minutes did that take? You must have been very jazzed to get those results.
Yeah, and it's always fun because I put most of my research and time into making this quicker for others. They don't take up this time.
Right. Here, and I have a quick question for you, too. So with one of the participants, you said that they were running around in the malls, but you didn't assess it in the malls. You assessed it in the baited environment with the water activities. Did the parents...
Yeah, I would have loved
gone
out in the end to make sure that it worked in those situations as they described, but our resources were specific to that clinic.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah. Do you think, you captured it? Did they run to that water?
All I can do is hope. And we have called families to ask them, but again, those are just social validity measures. We don't have the direct measures of it if it actually is working. So you bring up an excellent point, and it is something I wonder about often.
But in the actual condition, though, he ran to that water activity?
Oh, yeah.
He was like, yes! Water!
This individual, he didn't have very many skills, and he didn't have very many reinforcers, and he was the non-verbal vocal one, and water play was it, and he got to it. He could play with water for hours.
That was his jam.
Yeah.
Would you mind kind of going through the graphs from your results?
Sure. Figure 2.
Figure 2.
Page 7.
I love those Iske graphs. They're so look, anyone should be able to tell what this means because there's 2 lines and they're really far away.
Yeah, it's not much to analyze, right? It's and that's the conceptual ease about it too. Is you have contingent access to those putative reinforcers in one context, and then you have non-contingent access. So there's no addition of any other variables. It's pretty simple. Just continuous access versus contingent access, and are you going to see a difference? And what we're looking for is, specific to these latency ones, is no elopement, right? We want complete control, and that control condition is, it's not a long duration to elopement, I want no elopement, so that I can be completely confident that there is a difference between that control and the test. And what you'll notice in that figure 2 is, during the control, when he had, specifically Steve had non-contingent access to water play, he never eloped from it, which is a lot, right? If that's the reinforcer for his elopement, he shouldn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
And then in the test conditions, he would elope from our sides and go to the water play.
It's beautiful. I also like how you added the little no response bar up on the top of your y-axis. Yeah. So instead of just showing, because on other latency graphs I've seen, it just looks like it
just ceilings, right?
Yeah, exactly. It ceilings out. But this helps to indicate that, no, they never did it. He stayed there with the water the whole time. So that was a nice addition.
Yeah, so that's basically it. Just show nothing's happening.
Yeah.
Dreamy. Treatment done.
So you've got your 2 participants, your nice quick results. You have low latencies. During the test condition, you have, like you said, they aren't going anywhere during those moments where they have their putative reinforcers freely available, and from that you're able to create your treatment.
Yeah, and for anyone not looking at this graph, it was 2 sessions of the control and 3 sessions of test. For each participant.
Josh,
total.
could you speak to that in terms of the extra test condition you did at the end? Is that something that is more recently been added to some of the Iske protocols, or you just wanted to have a 3rd test condition?
We typically stay with 3 sessions in the test condition because that's where you're really going to look for variability, and you'll have to visually analyze any changes in your data. But the control, if you have complete elimination, really, for me to be confident that they're really controlling for the problem behavior, all I need is one replication of that complete elimination. So we do add a little bit more in the test condition. And if you need more sessions, we always say conduct more. Okay. But we do control test, just to get that multi-element going. But at the end, we do 2 tests in a row to make sure that it's not a function of that changing back and forth. We mix it up, and we still get the same results.
Yeah, I hadn't seen the extra test condition, so that was good. And I mean, you explained it in the article as to why you want to have that extra step in there. All right.
Yeah. And it serves as a baseline also for our treatment, so make sure we have enough baseline points. And then
those continue to be your baseline. So once you started treatment, you already had your baseline. You didn't need to run another baseline, and then you were able to move right into treatment.
Yeah, it's to reduce any non-therapeutic aspects of what you're doing for this child.
So let's move on to figure 3. So those are your treatment graphs for your first participant. So either of your participants, if there's one you like the best, to go over.
Or just walk us through.
Walk us through. Yeah.
What'd you do?
Sure. Yeah. That first step in the treatment is functional communication training, and I'm starting to use a different term. We'll see if it catches on. But I'm calling it functional communication and complexity training because we're not just teaching a simple form of communication and moving on. We're building on that. So you teach a simple response to make sure that they contact the reinforcement at a dense schedule, and then you move on to teach them more developmentally appropriate and socially appropriate responses that are more likely to be reinforced in the environment. So for Steve, again, he was nonverbal or non-vocal. The first response was this large card, And especially because he was a learner that had very little skills, we made it, I don't remember the exact dimensions, but it was pretty big and in there, right? So we want him to be successful, but I'm not going to leave him and give him to the family with this huge card that's going to be very difficult.
I love that. Carry this card everywhere.
Just live in a pool.
Yeah.
You'll be fine.
It's not practical. So we move on to a more complex response, which was putting a little bracelet on him with a small card so that whenever he saw water out there, he can just pull it off from his bracelet and hand it to his parents. And it's a little different. The complexity differs depending on each individual. And for our verbal client, Zane, I believe his was something like, "Excuse me, may I have my way, please?" But he also had to specify the person he was talking to.
Yeah. So, excuse me, who? Yeah.
Yeah. So his complexity grew to where he had to see the individual he wanted to talk to. He had to say, "Excuse me," to that person, say their name, and then they have to wait until we say, "Yeah, what's up?" And then he say, "May I have my way?" And then we give him the reinforcer. So we add some niceties too, and I think that's important for teachers and parents.
Yeah, I do love how the Iske comes up with the treatment that always comes from it. Always seems very easy to explain to parents of like, there's something your child wants. Let's make sure they understand how to get it, and then add that complexity piece. I think that could catch on Josh, the extra complexity.
FCCT.
It's FCCT.
Okay. Yeah, that's very easy to remember.
It is.
But I think the complexity training is important because you're right. It would be simple to say, and then we taught them to say, "Let me live in the pool," and that was it. We were done. Goodbye. What's the social validity 6 months later?
Yeah, and the good thing about this is it has this added benefit of you're working towards that end goal of, one, they're complying with you because you keep teaching them new responses, so they keep having to follow your instructions of, here's the new one, here's the more complex one. And you're going to get to compliance training later on or following instructions. And then also you're adding a delay. So the more and more complex that response gets, the longer it takes for them to say it. So this entire time they don't realize it, but the delay is building already when they have to say, "Me, what's up? Can I have my way?" It's way different from just my way and getting your things right away.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like that's the question parents always bring up, right, when you're talking about functional communication training is, great, but there's going to be a time where I have to say no. Or there's going to be a time where the chicken nuggets are not ready yet, right? They're in the microwave. So what's going to happen then? And this just does a beautiful job of walking through what that delay and denial training is going to look like.
Yeah, that's that next step is we say no. We ask the parents, and like, how do you tell them no? We're going to say that to him or her. Then we teach them a response that's appropriate to us saying no. It's not crying. It's not having a meltdown or a tantrum. It's saying, okay, I can deal with this. No problem,
What do you usually do with, I'm sure it changes from client to client, but in terms of the delay, like how do you fill the delay? Are you doing tasks? Are you talking? Are you just sort of no or hold on, and then you just sit for 30 seconds or however long the delay is?
Yeah, we always use a contingency-based delay. So there's some sort of response requirement during this time in order to produce the reinforcer again. But for these clients, it was specifically a GRO-based response requirement because it was latency and it was elopement. So we say no, they say okay, no problem, and then we say, okay, now you have to either walk with us, which was Steve, hold our hand, how they would do it in a mall, and we would walk around the building and he would have to hold our hand and walk with us the entire time. And then for Zane, because he had to wait in line a lot, we just put him against the wall and said, just like a teacher, no, you can't have your way right now. Just, wait right there in line.
Man, that must have been difficult for him.
Yeah, we go at a slow pace, right? So in those figures, you can see we're thinning the time in which they have to wait there, and we start with, and this is kind of confusing, the graph, I know, for people, but when you look at that thinning levels where it says like 1-2-3, 5-20, it's randomized. So they don't know how long they have to wait. So when we tell Zane, hey, you have to sit on this wall and wait in line, he doesn't know if it's for 5 seconds or if it's for 20 seconds or for 30 seconds. And we like to keep that unpredictable.
Yeah. And to start, it really was just, no, stand against the wall. Okay, go, do whatever. You know, it was that short a time and from the...
Yeah, there's the surprise element, and surprise can be quite reinforcing. And it also kind of adds to that joint control of them waiting and following your instructions, right? Because they start to watch you and like, is it now? Are you going to say it now? So they're paying attention to you to ensure that they can maximize when that reinforcer is going to be delivered. And that's kind of what we want, right, as teachers, is the student following us and watching for us for what our next instruction is.
Josh, can you be honest? Have you ever, when you're doing those like really quick turnaround times when the child, folds their hand and says, okay, and then you immediately give the reinforcer, do you ever feel a little silly that it's that fast, even though you know why?
Yeah. I think it's for the end goal. We understand. But also it's kind of rewarding because those fast ones, the kids love them, right?
Right.
They're like, yes!
And they just get the most excited about. So Steve would just run right to the water, and it's especially rewarding for him or for other learners that have these very little skills to see them like start to make eye contact, to see them just get excited about something. So it is silly, but it produces some pretty rewarding effects.
That's good. I appreciate you sharing that, Josh, because it's hard to put that in the article, like that kind of warm feeling you get from like they're making eye contact, they're doing all these extra little things, because it's not directly related to the research, but it's important, I think, for the practitioner, for the parents. So.
Oh yeah. For the parents, they understand in the end what it's going to look like, right? When you say I'm creating an environment that's supposed to be unpredictable, it makes more sense to them than you have to follow every single, procedure correctly or else things are going to fall apart. Mm-hmm. For us, we're trying to make the environment to look like it's always falling apart so that the kid or the child can behave appropriately in those situations where things just aren't going to work out.
Yeah. So you got really nice results in terms of all components of your FCCT. I almost said FCCT training, and I was going to be really embarrassed. I didn't, though.
I would have caught you.
And you did a social validity. It's just kind of standard social validity. Was that sort of just part of the clinic, or that's something that you wanted to add? You just like to add anytime you're working with families?
Yep, that's in a clinic and for anyone, right? We want to make sure that what we're doing has value to you and not just a quantitative change in behavior.
So I'm looking at the social validity right now, Josh, and I see that Steve's caregiver rated a 6 out of 7 for the extent to which you feel confident applying the same strategies. Did they tell you anything additional for that? They're like, I feel confident, but it's the mall and I'm scared, or anything like that?
Sometimes they don't want to leave, right? They see changes.
Right.
And they're afraid to go out in the world, and I understand that.
Me too.
That's why I wish we always had the opportunity to go with them at first. Because it's nice to have the trained individual, because we train them also in the second week. So the first week, and this is intense, so it's 7-hour days for these children for 2 weeks. And the second week is devoted to training the family members. And sometimes it's hard to say goodbye, right? They want someone there by their side, and they're afraid to do it on their own. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's not always, I'm ready to go.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a good thing to point out, too, though, because if you see, like, Zane's caregiver was like, this is amazing, I strongly agree on everything. And then you see that 6 there, and you're like, I wonder why. But it makes sense, right? Because that's a potentially weird situation, right? When you're in the mall and there's lots of people and...
I find them all very stressful.
Me too,
You totally do, Diana.
I
don't think I've seen you in a mall for any extended period of time, Jackie.
Because I don't go to the mall for any extended period of time. I actually bought an outfit this weekend in 15 minutes. I walked in and I was like, hey, mannequin. Took it off and then brought it home.
Took the mannequin and you just
the whole
left
mannequin.
the
Put her under your arm.
Yeah, I was like, you're coming with me. Her name is Molly.
Because she's from the mall.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Good job, Diana.
So, Josh, these 7-hour days, they weren't only working on this one behavioral treatment, right? Or were they?
It was. I mean, of course they get breaks. But,
no peeing.
These are clients that either had no services or couldn't get services because of their problem behavior, or were being kicked out of schools because they just didn't have the expertise to manage their problem behavior. So it was 2 weeks straight assessing and treating behavior.
That's got to be kind of stressful, to just have like, you got to solve this problem. You got 2 weeks, go. Or it's not a time. It's not timed like that, was it? It was sort of, this was just sort of.
It is, yeah. It was.
Oh.
You have 2 weeks. We had 2 weeks exactly.
Wow.
And there was no extensions, but most people we were able to do it within the first week.
Oof, that's good. Assessment and initial treatment, and then the second week was all parent training.
Yeah, so the assessment, we got to treatment on the first day for, I would say, 99% of clients, right? If we have assessment that takes 10 minutes to 20 minutes, we can go on to treatment pretty quickly. So pretty much the first day, we were able to go from assessment to treatment.
Oof.
Well, it makes sense then that you're also, like, that whole second week is training the parents and what to do because you're with them for such a limited amount of time. Because, immediately I start to think, well, how do you establish yourself as a reinforcer and how do you establish stimulus control? But like, you're just there to teach the parents what to do, given that you only have 2 weeks and then they need to be able to implement this.
Mm-hmm.
They were required to be there for the entire 2 weeks watching.
Yeah.
So we made sure that everything was transparent, and I want that for every parent to watch and say, bring up something and be like, oh, but my environment's like this, or my home is like this, so we can keep modifying and making exactly what they're looking for, and that can add to their confidence in the end.
That's good. So, Josh, you mentioned that one of the limitations of the study was that you wish you'd been able to then actually get either train the parents in the settings, or at least observe the parents in the actual settings in which the problem behavior occurred. Were there any other areas that you felt that you wanted to expand upon, sort of the work you did, or that you have expanded upon and with subsequent cases you've worked with or clients you've worked with?
Yeah, it's just going in towards that direction of generality is really important for us as behavior analysts. So we want global outcomes, not just we changed elopement, right? Or we eliminated elopement in our controlled setting. We want to know, at least before, they were being kicked out of school this many times. Now they're not being kicked out of school. Or before, they were causing this much tissue damage, and now they're not. So we want those outcomes that say we're not just treating problem behavior with these procedures. We're treating something that provides more to the family, something more meaningful.
I think that's a good cue for us to move into our dissemination station. We don't need any fancy technology. We've got a Foley artist, Jack McDonald, here to play us in.
Well, guys, we're here. Dissemination station. Thanks for riding.
And Josh is our guest conductor. Oh, God, we should do that, shouldn't we? Make our guests
totally should.
You gotta put on your conductor hat. Take a picture so we know you did it.
Don't make him do that. Josh, take the hat off. I'm so sorry.
So you've been working a long time with the Iske. Have you used the Latency FA, kind of the Latency FA research within any of your Iskes recently, or was that very specific to this case because it was that elopement where you really couldn't reset the environment?
Yeah, it was kind of specific to these cases. In practice, if I ever provide consultation services, I do tell them that that's an option. But I've been more recently doing research on single session Iske, so creating an analysis within just one test condition, a 5-minute, 10-minute test condition. Can we see differentiation between when the reinforcer is provided versus when it's not available? And just another route of trying to get to efficiency, right?
Yeah. So
I think, for all of us, we've all been pretty positive. I don't think we've talked about it too much, but in terms of the use of the Iske, we're all relatively positive about that as sort of a direction for behavior assessment, right? I know certainly you are, Josh. I know. Certainly that's really the main assessment that I use because I don't have just 2 weeks, but working in school settings, the order of the day is you need to get this assessment done because we don't really care about the assessment and the meeting that you then have to talk about the results of your assessment because no one cares. We need you to fix the problem. So the goal of the assessment is really to get to that treatment. As it is for everyone, but it is very clear that the problem's got to be solved as fast as possible. And I find the Iske has done that in ways that are, the increased generality. I think the treatment options usually are very not exactly basic, but they're straightforward. They're applicable for multiple different environments, different levels of teachers, for parents. I'm very much on board unless I really have a case where I don't think anyone can be a informed enough interviewee. I typically move and use the Iske, but Jackie and Diana, what are your thoughts on it? Because it's actually I'm surprised it's the first time it's really come up in the show. Because I know we've all talked about the Iske, just because that's what we do. We're not podcasting; is just talk about Iskes and things. But I mean, do you see that as kind of the sort of the next step in terms of the behavior assessment?
I think,
or you don't want to talk about it right now?
Yeah.
Not while I'm on the phone.
Yeah, no, it's fine. So I think it's a good assessment to use if you can get that information on the assessment, right? So sometimes you can. So I've been in a situation where I haven't been able to pinpoint. So it's not as simple as this is not as straightforward, or the parents maybe have no idea, or they're new to a classroom, or I maybe can't tease apart those variables. So I may want to use another type of assessment, such as maybe just the more of a standard FA, or a discrete trial FA. But I think it's definitely something that we should continue researching and find out what the boundaries are, right? So when is it going to be applicable? When may it not be applicable? Just like with all assessments, I think, for me anyway. And
not all of I don't know if you've read the 2018 article we put out with the 25 replications of... I have, Josh. I'm just a fangirl. I just read all of them like, ooh, Josh wrote that. I'm going to read it. I make obscure articles, so I don't think anyone's reading them. But some of those were isolated, right? We're not saying always synthesize reinforcement. I think that's where people get tripped up on. And
right.
They don't want you to throw the kitchen sink. We only synthesize to the point at which we assume that's the maintaining contingency.
Right.
So if a parent describes a situation that isn't synthesized, we don't do it. Yeah. Yeah, so I think another thing that you have to think about with the Iske as well is that I think it may be a little more challenging for someone that doesn't have a lot of experience running FAs or running in interviews.
That could be.
I've had some students that we've practiced using the Iske in the classroom with specific scenarios that I had designated pretty black and white, like this is what you would do if this would happen. And they couldn't quite come to that conclusion yet because they didn't really, it is take practice. They didn't really know what they were looking for. But I think that takes practice. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend the Iske for someone that's straight out the bat. But again, if they are straight out of, getting the exam, they probably shouldn't be running an FA by themselves. Right? So they probably should have a supervisor, regardless of what FA they're using. They probably should have a supervisor that has experience doing it with them. So that point would be moot. Whatever, guys.
No, they're two different words.
I know.
Jackie.
That point would be moot. How's that spelled? The same way?
No, it's Moot.
You know what? You and your fancy words. But so that's one, cautious thing that I would say. But I say that with all FAs.
You're a nervous Nelly, Jackie. I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it like it is.
I am a nervous Nelly because who is our audience? People that are just becoming behavior analysts, and we shouldn't give them undue confidence in something that they've never done before. You can't be a horse diver the first time, Rob.
You can't be a horse diver anywhere, Jackie. That is illegal. You cannot make horses. It's in most states.
Except for Magical Kingdom in Lake George, New York.
Oh, I was going to say, I think New York is the only one that's still legal. I know even Florida has banned horse jumping.
You know who that actress was? Gabrielle Anwar.
I know. From Bird Notice. Remember Bird Notice?
So the only place that you can watch horse diving now is at Magical Kingdom in Lake George, New York. It's a daily show.
If you'd like to watch animals being tortured, head up to Lake George.
I actually didn't go. We went to Magical Kingdom. It's creepy. But we did not watch the horse diving because I felt wrong.
It's an ethical dilemma.
But I didn't watch it. So I just rode all the rides and then left.
Okay.
I think that it is misleading for us to think that we are able to determine with absolute certainty what's maintaining behavior. And by dividing conditions up the way that we typically do in standard FA, it sounds so concrete and absolute, like this behavior is only maintained by attention, but there's so many different types of attention, and attention's never occurring alone, escape is never occurring alone. That's what Kirk says, is that you're always escaping to something else. So I really think that thinking about behavior in the context in which it's occurring and the circumstances surrounding it in its natural environment is really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
It's more helpful to families. And, you're saying, Josh, that you don't have to synthesize the reinforcers unless you have to synthesize the reinforcers, but it should be something that's available and something that we should be considering, because you get into these conundrums. You're like, but they like the attention, but they're escaping to the attention, but then they want to be alone, and it's never that easy. It's always a combination of different things, and the Iske allows you to really open that up and think about those possibilities and think about how behavior is most likely being reinforced in the natural environment, and you don't have to tease it apart. If it's both, right? You treat both.
Yeah.
And I love the freedom that can provide to us, and I think can allow us to make more sophisticated and tailored treatments.
I think you make an excellent point. When I think about all the reinforcers in my life, it's a combination of things always. So why can't we treat these children with intellectual disabilities the same way as us and define the reinforcers that are important to them rather than assuming that it's going to fit within these categories we defined in 1982.
Right.
And then, Josh, earlier you made the point about when you're doing the interview itself, that extra level of social validity, of how nice it is for parents to feel like they're actually experts in their own child. I know when I've gotten to some of the questions in the interview forum, or why do you think this is happening? And I've had people look at me like, you actually care about what I think? Because I just figured you were going to tell me what it was, and who cares what I'm telling you? And they seem shocked and sometimes appreciative that I actually would like to know, what do you think is going on here? Or what are the things that you do? And sometimes they get nervous, especially if they've been in the field long enough and they've done more formal FAs. They get a little confused, like, oh, I shouldn't tell you, right? That's going to confound your results. That's going to be a problem. So I do like that whole, just that process.
Yeah, if anything, the interview at the very least builds rapport with that family, and you need that when you're working with them, because you need buy-in, and you don't want them to feel like in a sterile environment in the doctor's office and they can't talk or they feel uncomfortable. It's come, tell me your story. I want to hear what you have to say about your child. It's important to me.
Yeah, and I think our field can get as many allies as we need, because parents work with plenty, especially if you have a child with multiple disabilities. They've had plenty of people telling them, here's what's wrong with your kid, stupid, let me tell you. They don't need us to add to that. We should be better allies. We've got our talk about Iske, and in terms of Latency FA, I suppose if you are working with problem behavior that really doesn't lend itself to the reset, the Latency FA seems like you've only got some research, but a nice way to look at, nice addition to your assessment process. And Josh, so you haven't really had too many other opportunities to look at Latency FAs in terms of practice or research?
No, this is specific to certain situations, I think. But I think it's something that can be used quite frequently if you're looking to make your analysis even faster. Yeah.
Speed. If I were a family and I said, give me 10 minutes, I'll tell you what's going on.
Here I go.
It's my 10-minute behavior assessment guarantee. That would be very positive. If it were good, I suppose anyone could say, give me 2 seconds. Let me take a look. Yep, kid seems to hate work. There you go. It's escape. Bye-bye.
We're done here.
All right,
I feel good.
You feel good?
I do. Yeah.
Oh, good. If you feel good, then I feel good.
Okay.
Then we all feel good.
I feel great.
Good. Josh, you feel good?
I think I'm good.
All right. Everyone's good here at AVA Inside Track. We hope you enjoyed the episode, listeners out there. We want to make sure you get your second secret code word, courtesy of Dr. Jessel, and that second code word is roulette. ROULETTE. From the French, roux and let, which stands for
Laissez le bon temps rouler.
Yeah, laissez le bon temps rouler. It's probably something to do with round, right? I'd assume. My
roll.
French. Yeah,
Rolling.
was it roll?
Rolling.
What's let?
Little thing.
Or do you think it might be a verb conjugation? I'm trying to think back to my high school and college French.
I just told you what it was. Little thing.
Roulette. Where can
Little
you play?
thing.
Can you play roulette up in Lake George, Jackie? Do they not? Have they outlawed?
No, there are.
The horses play it.
I don't know if there's a casino. There are not.
Come to Lake George for all your hedonistic animal abuse needs.
You can go to Magical Kingdom. You can go to Six Flags. You can go to Water Safari. Where the fun never stops, but I don't know.
That sounds like a real destination.
It is. It's beautiful.
Anyway, roulette. Thanks everyone so much for being here. Josh, thank you so much for taking the time out to talk with us about your research and about latency FAs and the Iske. It's been a real treat. I hope you had a good time.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Oh yeah, of course. We're always very excited. It's always fun to have an extra voice. For all of you listeners, thank you so much for listening. ABA Inside Track comes out every single week. In between our full-length episodes, we have our fun little preview episodes, which you can find on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us on YouTube, on our website at abainsidetrack.com, and on Facebook and Twitter.
Or you can email us
At abainsidetrack@gmail.com. You can find Dr. Jessel's work on all sorts of publications, and you can go visit him at his school. No, sorry, Josh.
My office. We'll talk.
123 University Lane in School Street.
That would be amazing.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for being here again, Josh. Big thank you. Thank you, Jackie, Diana. Thanks to all our listeners. We'll be back next week with a full-length, with a preview episode. But until then, keep responding. Bye.
See ya.
Bye.